So welcome Chapter 13 members. Today I have a special guest here with me, and this is Attorney Janice Shelton, who's with us today. We've picked some great subjects for you, and today we're going to share some of those things with you. Today, Janice, I want to start off by talking about performance appraisals.
I think that's a good topic to start off with because it's one of the most frequent matters that I find on my desk.
Let's start off by talking about one of my favorite topics, self-assessments.
Very important. And one thing I would point out before I even delve into that is that a lot of times people will ask you, well, what does the union do for me? Now, there are some things in the law that protect you as far as your performance appraisals are concerned, but those things are very limited. What really protects you in terms of performance appraisals is what's in the contract.
Yes.
And the right to do a self-assessment and the weight that should be given to that self-assessment is a contractual matter and a contractual right. So this is something that the union has bargained for you, and it's really important for all members to take full advantage of it.
Yes, and I'm so excited that we get to share some of these details that members should be able to take advantage of.
Yes.
Self-assessment is one of those things that I didn't start doing, I think, maybe until about my fourth year here, but it is something that I would encourage each and every one of you to take time to do. It does make a difference. We're going to talk a little bit about that a little more today.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. There are several things that I would like to point out to our members about self-assessments. We look to Article 12 in the contract, which is what deals with performance appraisals. If you look at Article 12, Section 4B6, it mentions that during the final 30 days of the performance appraisal cycle, employees have the right to submit a self-assessment. And so I want to encourage employees to know when the end of your appraisal period is so that before that 30th day, before the end of the cycle, that you can submit the performance appraisal. After that, they don't have to accept it, but before that, they do.
And here's a tip, something that I do, and that may be helpful to you as well. When I receive my calendar every year, that's one of the things that I always put out 60 days before my annual ends. Is I put a date out there that this is 60 days so that I know that I can start scheduling that on my calendar.
That's a really great idea.
Yes.
I'm going to write that one down. Well, another thing that employees should know is that to prepare the self-assessment, the contract provides them with up to 4 hours on administrative time to prepare that. So you do have to give your manager an opportunity to schedule that. So you don't want to wait until the day before that self-assessment is due. But within that final 30-day period before the self-assessment comes due, just ask your manager for the time to prepare a self-assessment. And under the contract, they're required to give that time to you.
Isn't that excellent? This is something that you can take advantage of, and the time is allotted for you.
Absolutely. And another thing that's provided for in our contract that is not a matter of statute, is purely a creature of the contract, is the right to do a web-based tutorial on how to properly prepare a self-assessment. And you get up to 1 hour of administrative time to take that web-based tutorial, and it lays out for you how do you do a self-assessment and how to do it effectively so that it will help your manager in preparing a self-assessment that they can use.
And so if you've never done this before, or if you're one of our new members or new employees, this may be very beneficial to you to check into the ITM course just to see, even to get a refresher. For those of you that may have not done it in a while, I would encourage all of our members to take that refresher course.
Yeah, and you get 1 hour on the clock to take it one time. However, you can take the class as many times as you like. So every year, if you want to take a minute to take that class and refresh yourself, absolutely no problem with that.
Yes.
Another thing about self-assessments that, again, is provided for in our contract, that if you submit a self-assessment and the supervisor decides not to consider it, they have to explain why. And that right is explained in Article 12, Section 4B7. That's huge.
Yes, it is.
And it's particularly large because one of the problems that I see a lot, that employees bring to me a lot, is that the manager has not done enough reviews of them during the course of the year. So if you submit a self-assessment and management has not done the reviews, how are they going to reject that self-assessment?
That's correct. And that's one plus, because you can evaluate yourself even if the manager has not.
Yep.
So just remember that, because that self-assessment has to be considered and has to be explained if it's not used.
Yep.
That's really good, Janice.
Good stuff, right?
Yes.
Another provision of the contract, and this is actually incorporated by law, is that the performance appraisal should be based on a reasonable and representative sample of the work. And management is supposed to review a reasonable and representative sample of the work. But like I said before, more and more I'm getting cases where management has not done sufficient reviews of an employee during the course of the year. I don't understand it.
Well, take advantage of it.
If nothing else, right?
We may not understand it, but we understand our rights, and that's what we're trying to make sure that you understand what's your rights under the contract. And so this is one of them that you can take advantage of.
So in the contract, if you look at Article 12, Section 4C1, it does specifically state that the review must be based on a reasonable and representative sample of the work. And what that leads to is a problem that we see sometimes, which is targeted work. Now, Tanja, if I was going to ask you, what is targeted work in your mind?
Well, as a revenue officer, there are certain things that show red flags for managers, such as overage cases.
Oh, that's a good one.
Large dollar cases, cases that may have CSAID issues or statute issues. But any of those things that give those red flags to managers, that may make them look into this case. And so that would be more of a targeted evaluation or targeted work if the only thing that they're pulling are just those cases.
Right. I would agree with that. And let's say for customer service representatives, if you're a CSR and you have some short calls and you have some really long calls,
yes.
If you notice that management is only pulling the really long calls and reviewing those, that is targeted work. So they would have to pull also calls that are not as long,
yes,
right?
That's correct.
Or even, let's say if there's something that you as an individual have problems with. For example, let's say manual refunds.
Okay.
I can't add 2 and 2. That's why I went to law school, right?
Okay.
So if I had to do manual refunds, that would be a problem for me, right?
Okay, it would.
So if my manager knows, there's a case with targeted refunds, I'm going to review that on Janice, then the manager would also have to review cases that don't involve that. So if you see that they're targeting things, targeting can be a lot of different things is the point of this conversation.
Yes.
So if you feel that management is intentionally picking work that is going to negatively impact your performance appraisal, when you come and talk to your union steward about it, you will want to raise that.
Your evaluation should consist of a reasonable sample of your work, and that's the reason why.
Exactly. And again, this is per the contract, management has to justify the sample of work that they use. Okay, so if we find and we're making arguments that it's not reasonable, fine. The agency has to explain why it is reasonable, and that's their burden. And as the union, if we're filing a grievance, we have the right to ask the question, but you as an employee also have the right to raise that with your manager if you feel that work is being targeted and not being properly offset.
And Janice, I actually had this to happen to me one time, and I realized, and I did not know, I was a new revenue officer, maybe year 2 or so, and I realized that the manager was pulling only potential overage cases. And so my evaluation consisted of majority potential overage cases. Now, there were a few other ones here and there, but the reviews were only done on potential overage when I had closed and done some other work, but this were the cases that were only looked at. That definitely was targeting my work.
It certainly was. It certainly was. And so, again, when you come to the union, we have stewards who are revenue officers, revenue agents, CSRs, and so they may not know all of the issues. So it's important for you as a member to understand this so that when you come to us, you can explain if you feel that there's an issue with the sample of work not being reasonable and representative.
So Janice, now that we've talked about a reasonable sample of the work, let's talk about the right to rebut something that you may not feel that's just right.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, well, so there's different rights to rebut in the contract. First, let's just talk about the right to rebut the appraisal overall.
Okay.
As an employee, if you disagree with your performance appraisal when you get it at the end of the year, you have the right to submit a written rebuttal to that appraisal. And management is not supposed to come back and counter what you rebut.
Okay.
Basically, what they're supposed to do is merely attach it to the performance appraisal. Well, why do I think that this right to rebut is important?
Okay.
The union files a grievance. If they have your version, your explanation, why you disagree with the assessment that management has performed, if the case comes to my desk, I'm going to be a lot more persuaded by an employee who has taken the time to do that work than by someone who hasn't done self-assessment, who hasn't done any rebuttal of the performance appraisal.
And I think that that's good to know that you do have a right to rebut the evaluation itself. Appraisal, to rebut that appraisal itself.
Sure. Yeah, and it has to be done within 15 work days of the time that you receive the assessment. And you are entitled to up to 4 hours of admin time on the clock to prepare that. So why wouldn't you prepare that?
Yes. It's definitely important to see their reason why that they don't agree and have it in black and white.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And just that whole process of going through and doing the analysis, you may find that maybe you actually agree with management, or you may identify some reasons why what they came up with when they assigned that assessment is really wrong. So either way, it's a benefit to do it.
Correct.
The next topic that I would like to talk about is evaluative recordation.
Okay.
So what is an evaluative recordation? Basically, it's any type of review of your performance that a manager does during the course of the year. Now, you cannot file a grievance over an individual evaluative recordation. Okay. However, you do have the right to rebut individual evaluative recordations, which is really important. Again, when the case comes to me for consideration, and probably I'm guessing that the stewards feel the same way, if someone's been charged with errors and the employee has not rebutted the error when it happens, then it's going to be difficult at the end of the year for us to build a whole case rebutting all of these errors that are in the file if the employee has not already documented it. And that's for several reasons. One, you're not allowed to keep taxpayer information around, so it may not be fresh anymore in your mind as to why you disagree with the assessment or the evaluative recordation that management issued, right?
Right.
Yeah. And also, you may not remember why you did what you did. Right?
And that's the thing that I think that's the biggest thing for me, is to do it when it's fresh on your mind, because it's nothing like trying to go back days or months later and you've really forgotten the reason why you may disagree with something. But the more time you let go by, I would say the less effective it may be, because right there in the moment when you're passionate about it,
oh yeah, they did what?
Yes, is the best time to write and document. And I probably would talk about this to you 50 million times about how important it is to document.
Yeah. And Tanya, did you know that employees are entitled to a reasonable amount of administrative time to rebut evaluative recommendations that they don't agree with?
Yes, and how important is that and beneficial? And not only just that, Janice, how much time can they use?
They're entitled to a reasonable amount of time, okay? A reasonable amount of time. And also, management has to give them that time within 3 days of when they make the request. So don't let your manager put you off and off and off, because, again, if you do it contemporaneously, it's going to be a lot more effective.
And listen, Janice, I know they may be saying, listen, I have enough work if it is, right? But take control of your own situation and don't leave it up to someone else. So if it's something that you don't agree with, stop, request the time, and write it.
I agree with that, Tanja. This is all about employees taking control of their evaluations. Your evaluations affect so much. What kind of training you get, what kind of promotions you're going to qualify for, whether or not you're going to get a performance award or not. So, I mean, not that management does not benefit from doing a good job of evaluating employees, but truthfully, it's going to affect the employee a lot more than it affects their manager, how well the evaluation is done.
And the truth is that sometimes human error. And you just have to make sure that the error doesn't fall and affect you.
Yeah.
So if it does, go ahead, take the time. The time is given, is there for you. Request the time, take it, use it, and put it in black and white. So Janice, let's talk about evaluative recommendations now.
Evaluative recommendations, very important topic. Well, so let's first start with what is an evaluative recommendation. Okay, so it's any kind of performance feedback that management provides to an employee during the course of the performance year, right?
Right.
And it should be in writing, because if it's not in writing,
it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. You heard it here first, right? No, you didn't hear first, because you always hear that as an IRS employee.
That
right?
is correct.
I mean, that's
correct.
Just the mantra.
I mean, maybe one of the first things that I learned when I walked through the door.
Absolutely. So, so evaluative recommendations are supposed to be given to employees within 15 work days of the time the supervisor became aware or should have become aware of the event that it addresses.
So, Janice, I have a question. So we have CCIs.
What's a CCI?
It's like case consultations.
Okay.
We meet with our manager once a month with cases that they want to talk about. Usually those cases may be something that may have been on a report or caused some type of alarm, maybe statute issue, or something is flagging that there's some sort of issue there. Overage case, potential overage case, or something. Now they use currency of inventory if it's something that's on there. So this is a case that they may want to talk about during consultations. During consultations, let's say if I bring something up to my manager, or I make my manager aware of a situation or something that's going on with this case, and or an issue that I'm having.
Okay.
And I make my manager aware during consultations during that time, but 3 months later it's time for my mid-year or it's time for my annual. This case is pulled for review, and I am actually gigged for something that I identified in CCIs. How does this article come along with this 15 days of the manager being aware?
In my opinion, if the employee has made management aware of a performance incident, and management has not conducted the evaluative recordation within 15 days of that, then they should not be using it.
Okay, and that's why I wanted to bring this out, because sometimes, and this kind of go hand in hand about what we were talking about before, that sometimes on mid-years and at annuals, targeted reviews happen, and they happen on these cases that we may have issues with.
Right.
9 times out of 10, that case, if it's a case with an issue, it has been discussed during consultations. So I always kind of wondered that, and I'm glad you were here to talk about that what happens if this comes up and is used after this 15-day time.
Yeah, you can ask management to get rid of it, and if they won't get rid of the evaluative recordation, when it comes time for your annual review, if it's negatively impacting your evaluation, definitely come to the union and we can ask to have that removed. And if we can't, with a nice conversation, get it removed, we can file a grievance on your behalf.
That is correct.
Another thing is, and this comes up a lot for call site employees, is these telephone calls, right? Mm-hmm. Because you don't have a case file to necessarily show all of the things that have been occurring on an ongoing basis, but what management does is they pick telephone calls to review. Mm-hmm. Well, according to our contract, management is supposed to conduct or to take a screenshot of any other calls that were reviewed by the manager but not evaluated on any day that the manager finds fault with a recorded call. So what is the purpose of that? Again, and you brought it up, and I appreciate you bringing it up, it's targeted reviews. Mm-hmm. If my manager has listened to several calls and they only review this one call, and the one call that they reviewed, you can see this call was really long and the other calls are really short, that goes to proving that there was something that was not quite right about the sample of work that was relied upon. So as an employee, if you have an issue with a review of a recorded contact, you should make your manager aware as soon as possible, because they have to save that call, they have to provide you with the screenshot, and they have to retain all of that documentation until the issue is resolved. Meaning they have to give you all the way through the end of the performance cycle and an opportunity to file a grievance over before they get rid of it. If they get rid of it before the end of the performance cycle, they got to throw it out and they can't use it in your evaluation.
That's very good to know, especially for those customer service reps.
Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of interesting things that go on with customer service employees and their performance appraisals.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And if I will say this, members, please, if nothing else, you stick your tab in your contract, you highlight the Article 12. Make yourself familiar with Article 12. Yeah. You may have to continuously look at it, but that's one of those articles that I would say to keep your tab there. Keep some highlights there so that you can always go back to it.
Yeah, frankly, I mean, I've been doing this job for a long time. I won't say how long, but I've been doing it a long time. And I myself have to go back and back and back to make sure that I am current on what's in the contract and that I'm reading it properly, and that with the cases that come before me, that I'm applying all of the appropriate provisions to the contract. Issue that comes up is the basis for the evaluation, right? Okay. And what do I mean when I say the basis for the evaluation? What I'm talking about, and it always comes back to this, I think, is the reasonable and representative sample of work, meaning what has management looked at to prepare the evaluation. Our contract specifically provides that management should not rely on solely EQRS. Mm-hmm. Now, everyone is not subject to EQRS, mm-hmm. but for those who are, it can't be the only thing that management looks at. They should be looking at a variety of work that you perform, whether that's inventory reviews, caseload reviews, workload reviews, whatever it is that is appropriate in your particular setting. It should not be based solely on this one type of work.
And because of this, let's go back to something that we talked about before, that if you're looking at everything and mostly you have just EQRS, guess what? You have that self-assessment that you did.
Yes. So if you have work that you can provide from your self-assessment and management has no observations in writing in your performance appraisal folder, then of course we're going to say, hey, the employee's evaluation of that work, of that element should be considered.
Self-assessment.
It really does come back to that. Thank you for bringing that up, Tanja.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Well, in closing, I just think I want to go back to what Tanja said earlier on, which is that employees have to take ownership of this process. Our contract lets them do it. If you can take control of your own work life, why would you not? Right?
Right. And I think a lot of times, and I would say even for myself, a lot of things I didn't do because I didn't know. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this sit down, and will be continuing to develop videos for you. It's because we want you to know your rights. Remember, all the time, it is very important that you are treated with dignity and respect. And I want to leave you with that. Thank you for tuning in with us, and we'll see you next time.